Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to the final day of 2 weeks of Thomas Hardy. Today I'm going to be talking about my favourite Thomas Hardy novels and one of my favourite books of all time, Jude the Obscure. Chapter 1 of Mary Green. The schoolmaster was leaving the village, and everybody seemed sorry. The miller at Chescombe lent him the small white-tiled cart and horse to carry his goods to the city of his destination about 20 miles off, such a vehicle proving of such sufficient size for the departed teacher's efforts. So Jude the Obscure was published in 1895. It was Thomas Hardy's last novel, partly because the reception of it was so poor that he decided not to write again, and it is my favourite Thomas Hardy novel. Now, I did say yesterday that I feel like Far From the Madding Crowd and Jude the Obscure are probably like my joint top Hardy novels. To a certain extent that's true, and I think reading them both, I would enjoy them both equally, or potentially I would enjoy Far From the Madding Crowd more. But I studied Jude the Obscure at university, I wrote an essay on it, and whenever I've written on a book, whenever I've studied it, if I loved it already, it tends to make me love it so much more. I also think that the themes in Jude the Obscure are so interesting and so fascinating and more complex and more interesting to me than the themes of Far From the Madding Crowd and the themes of any other Hardy novel. I think plot-wise, Far From the Madding Crowd is a superior novel to Jude the Obscure, and I probably like more than Jude the Obscure, but thematically, Jude the Obscure is perfection for me, and that will therefore mean that it will always be my favourite Thomas Hardy novel. I certainly wouldn't recommend starting with Jude the Obscure as your first Hardy because it's not a happy one. It is the bleakest one in many ways, but I also think it's one of the most powerful, one of the most brilliant, and I love it. I love it so much. Before I go into all the reasons why I think Jude the Obscure is an incredible book, I want to quickly explain what it's about. It follows the character of Jude, who comes from a very working class, lower class background, but from a young age is obsessed with educating himself and is obsessed with education. His dream in life is to go to Christminster University, which is the Wessex fictional equivalent of Oxford. He reads any books he can find, including a lot of Latin from a very, very young age, and he really, really wants to go to this university and be educated. That is his dream, is to be a scholar. And yet, because of his class background, it's very, very difficult for him to be so. He works for his aunt, who is a baker, and he trains as a stonemason, but despite this, all his life, what he really wants to do is go and be a scholar. Early on in his life, fairly near the beginning of the book, he meets a young woman called Arabella, and Arabella effectively tricks him and sort of pressures him into being married to him. Their marriage is just an awful disaster, completely doesn't work. Him and Arabella separate, and he goes to Christminster to work as a stonemason and to try and get closer to this educated world that he wants. And the book is basically about his quest for education and for learning and to become part of that scholarly world, and also partly about the way that his early relationship with Arabella affects the rest of his life. Also, it's about his relationship with his cousin Sue, who he meets in Christminster and falls completely in love with. In a way, the plot has a lot of similarities to Tess of the D'Urbervilles with the gender swapped. Arabella is not quite Alec d'Urberville, but it is strongly implied that she sort of tricks Jude and pressures Jude into sleeping with her in order that she can then use the fact that they've slept together to make him marry her. In the same way that everything with Alec d'Urberville affects Tess's relationships in later life and her relationship with Angel, the fact that Jude is married to Arabella obviously affects his relationship with Sue later on in life. This early mistake of marrying Arabella not only haunts and breaks and destroys all possibility of an ordinary relationship with Sue, but it also stops his dreams as a scholar. His dreams of going to Christminster and affects that as well. There's just so many things about Jude the Obscure that I love. Let's start off with the landscape. One of the things I really like about Jude the Obscure is the way that it's structured. It's structured in various parts, all of which take place at a different place within Wessex, and Jude moves around a lot in his life from different villages and towns in Wessex to Christminster. I love the way the book is structured and how that structure enables Hardy to write so interestingly about place. I also love that the book takes place over such a long period of time. It does start when he's a child, but he very quickly does become an adult, but even the section of the book when he is an adult takes place over about 10 years or more of his adult life, and that's something I really, really love. There are often big gaps between one part and the next where you meet Jude at one place and then you pick him up in another, and I think the way that's done is just really, really effective and really powerful. I also love the theme of education through this, which I think is fascinating, and the way that it explores Jude's love of education and his desire to be a scholar, and the fact that he just can't go to Oxford because he has no money. Hardy's social criticism here is so brilliant in so many areas, but it is wonderful in the area of education, the way he talks about the lack of opportunities Jude has because he is a poor working man. People won't take him seriously. He'll never be able to go to somewhere like Oxford, like Christminster, and that is just so heartbreaking and awful. Another thing that I find really interesting and really sad and painful in it is that Jude and Sue are both really, really educated. The way they speak to each other, they quote literature all the time, their Latin is brilliant, and they are so intelligent, and they are so much more intelligent than everyone at this university, than all of these very, very wealthy young men who know nothing about Latin and just don't have the same intellectual life as Jude and Sue. It's so heartbreaking, one, because Jude and Sue are so intelligent but are denied this world, but also because they have this intelligence and they want to get into this world of kind of the intellectual middle classes, but actually the intellectual middle classes aren't quite what they think they are, and they don't have the same language as Jude and Sue. The people at this university, the scholars, most of them don't care as deeply about language and about education as Jude and Sue do, and it's just so sad, but it's so clever and so brilliantly explored. From education to class, the way that Hardy looks at how Jude's social position denies him education and how he always feels sort of held back by his class but also a bit proud of it is really, really interesting. I love the way he writes about his role as a stonemason, because Jude has this career that he does enjoy and that he feels strongly about, and that brings him into a lot of different situations, but his work, the thing that he's doing, is not actually what he loves. It's not what he wants to do. He wants to go and read, he wants to be a scholar, and that is always denied to him because of his class. And the way that Hardy explores that, I love it so much, and it's probably like that element of the book is one of the reasons why this is my favourite Hardy novel. The other reason why this is my favourite Hardy novel and why I love this book so much is the relationship between Jude and Sue, because I genuinely think that there are several passages of dialogue between Jude and Sue that are the single best things that Hardy has written. They are incredible, they're absolutely wonderful. I love the way that Thomas Hardy uses Jude and Sue's relationship to explore ideas of sexuality, to explore ideas of Victorian morality, to explore relationships outside of marriage and the way that Victorian society judges that, and to just explore this wonderful, important love that these two characters have for each other. And because although this book is one of the single most depressing books I've ever read, and although it is so miserable and so bleak, and there are some moments that are so awfully, appallingly sad, the relationship between Jude and Sue and the fact that there are such great, brilliant moments of love in this book mean that even though it's miserable, there are moments of such important, brilliant, significant happiness that it's kind of okay. I mean, it's not, like, it's a sad book, I'm not gonna lie. There are some incidences especially which are just so awful, but at the same time, the moments of happiness that are within this book make it beautiful as well as bleak for me. It's not just bleak, it is more than that, it is so much more. I also love the character of Sue. I love how unconventional she is and how complicated she is, and I love too how the thing about Sue that is so powerful and so important is that there are elements of her which feel so modern and in which she really goes against the grain, but there are other parts of her in which Victorian morals and social codes are so embedded in her that she can't quite escape. I think she's such a complicated and wonderful character, and sometimes she says the most incredible, brilliant, wonderful things. I love the way that Sue views and talks about marriage. I think I should begin to be afraid of you, Jude, the moment you had contracted to cherish me under a government stamp and I was licensed to be loved on the premises by you. Oh, how horrible and sordid. Although, as you are, free, I trust you more than any man in the world. I love so much about Jude the Obscure, and more than anything, I love the relationship between Sue and Jude. I think it is so powerful and so important, and I think this is an incredible book. To quickly talk about things I like less about this book, I don't think that Jude the Obscure is as perfect a book as Far From the Madding Crowd, or The Woodlanders, or The Return of the Native, or The Mayor of Casterbridge. I think it is my favourite Thomas Hardy novel, not because I think it's his best, but because it deals with the themes that fascinate me most, because it is so unconventional and deals with so many Victorian taboos, and because it has at its heart this central, brilliant, fascinating relationship between Jude and Sue that I love, and because the dialogue between them is so powerful. I love it because it breaks my heart a bit. But I will admit that it's probably not as perfect a book, and there is one incident towards the sort of 2/3 point in this book which I know a lot of people take issue with and a lot of people think takes things too far, and I kind of agree. But because the rest of this book is so amazing for me, and because the influence and the impact of that event is so powerful and so interesting, I can't complain that it's there. Like, this book is so brilliant. I love Jude the Obscure so much, that although I can understand why it's not for everyone, and I know it's so bleak, and I know that bit in the 2/3 point is a little bit like too much, but despite that, I love it so much. I adore this book. I think it is incredible and beautiful and so wonderful, and just, yeah, I would highly recommend it. Don't start with it, because it is so awfully miserable that you ought to read another Hardy first to let you warm your way up into Jude the Obscure. but I would highly recommend it if you've read a few others by him because it is so utterly brilliant. It's one of my favourite books of all time. It's a wonderful, wonderful book and I can't recommend it enough. So thank you very much for watching this final video in the fortnight of Thomas Hardy. I hope you have been enjoying 2 weeks of Thomas Hardy and that you have enjoyed working your way through all of Thomas Hardy's novels. I have thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed filming and doing an author week again. It's been so long since I did one of these and they are so much fun. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read Jude the Obscure and what you thought of it, and also if you have been watching along with 2 weeks of Thomas Hardy, please let me know what your favourite Thomas Hardy novel is and what your least favourite is that you've read so far as well. Thank you very much for watching and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.